Bots are a dying breed in first-person shooter video games. They were once used to fill servers and to help people get acquainted with a particular game. There are many pros and cons to using bots in these sort of games. Pros include filling servers, good practice, a relaxed atmosphere, they give a taste of a multiplayer experience, let you try out maps, weapons and classes. Whereas the cons, on the other hand, are often the AI isn't balanced, and recently there has been a sign of a dying game. The utilization of bots nowadays begs the question, are they needed? With the majority of gamers playing online, meaning most have an internet connection worthy enough of competing against other players, are bots still needed to bridge the gap of empty servers or required in general? I'd argue that they are. They lift any barrier to get a taster for the full experience. By allowing players to explore the inner workings of the games, they can get accustomed to the maps, the way weapons behave, learn strategies, and which classes, if there are any, that best suit that person's individual need. It allows teams to practice methods of attack or defense in certain games, particularly in competitive games such as Counter-Strike, where players can learn and practice specific tactics such as grenade spots. For older games in particular, bots are very useful in filling out servers. While some would argue that people should just let these old games die, I think that goes against the very sense of enjoying gaming. The majority of games which use bots in their multiplayer usually allow a physical player to take over a bot when they join the match, meaning an empty server at the beginning of a round could be completely full shortly after. Naturally, bots aren't always good, and this is usually the result of the AI programming. Quite often you'll find that bots behave in two distinct manners, like a fish out of water, not quite knowing what to do and running in groups around one another, or as a T-1000, being able to pinpoint you from across the map with little resistance. While the latter will certainly help shape players to become more adept and better skilled at that game, eventually it doesn't mean that the experience will be enjoyable. Thankfully, most games will allow the player to select a bot difficulty level themselves, in order to achieve a better experience and a learning curve which is in their control. This doesn't mean it's always the case. Some games which don't use bots for practice instead use a practice range or something similar for the player to shoot at a static target. While I understand this is a lot easier to put into a game as it doesn't really require a lot of work, the most useful thing to take away from a shooting range within a game is the recoil on each weapon, but this is still only against a static target, which isn't how players behave in game for a majority of the time. It doesn't take into account suppression, moving while shooting, terrain challenges, or bullet drops. One of the main types of games at the moment which would benefit greatly from the use of bots are the Battle Royale games, especially Battlegrounds. This game is so reliant on attachments, distances, and gear that it is sometimes hard to know when to swap one item out for another. How long did it take for people to publish accurate findings on whether you should use an angled or a vertical foregrip? I think bots would be a great idea considering how often the servers seem to crash or how long it can take between matches to get in and play. Even though it seems as if bots are a dying breed, there are still quite a few great games with bots. Hell, even Counter-Strike still uses them effectively. Valve constantly proved that with the right motivation behind it, bots can be a valuable asset for players both old and new to a game. For the Left 4 Dead series in particular, bots are invaluable. They make the campaign experience so much more worthwhile while playing online, unless you have a squad of friends who are capable of using their line of sight. But joining a game with a lobby full of strangers, and usually you'll have a bad time. People going AFK, team killing, or purposely sabotaging a mission are always ways to completely waste those valuable hours of your life you'll never get back. Some of his lost relics include the Unreal Tournament saga, the Arma series, Red Orchestra 2, and the Left 4 Dead games. Each game is a different subgenre of a first-person shooter, and each requires the utilization of bots a bit differently. Left 4 Dead requires the bots to aid you, the player, specifically in order to maximize your enjoyment. Then the Red Orchestra and Unreal Tournament bots act in a fairly similar fashion to one another, running towards the objectives no matter the cost of themselves, and for these games it works. A franchise which really reaps the benefits of bots is the military sim Arma. In Arma 3, players are able to create their own customizable scenarios and have them offline or online. Notable examples of the online game modes which take advantage of bots would be Zeus, Wasteland, and the DayZ variations. By including bots, the game allows the player to take everything in their stride, especially in the custom scenarios creator. This mode is critical in helping players come to grips with the name of the factions, the maps, the weapons available, and how to survive in a harsh environment, and there's a lot to learn. With the online part of the game having such a high learning curve and there being so little room for error, the whole experience can be incredibly daunting. I mean, who needs to be shouted at, as they haven't mastered the game within the 20 minutes they've had it? The use of bots in Arma also allows for missions to be significantly larger and more versatile than if the game relied entirely on human players. The missions that people have and continue to make through the Arma 3 Zeus are impressive to say the very least. People plan and coordinate entire military campaigns in that thing. Without bots, the number of boots on the ground would be drastically less, meaning the campaign would be weaker, the threats less challenging, or simply the feel of an actual war would be completely lost. That's the great thing about playing with these soulless beings. They can act as whatever a person wants them to be. Sometimes you want to be able to create a theatre of war or be in a tactical strike team. Bots can fill in those roles with you and against you. Sometimes you just want to warm up, so your reflexes are frosty. And sometimes you just want to blow off steam without some screaming 12-year-old tormenting you. With a colossal number of people logging on to play their favourite games every day, the chances of being abused over chat is almost guaranteed. And not everyone really likes that. The inclusion of bots in games allows players to get acquainted with weapons, vehicles, and terrain. If a map has secret locations or the game uses variables like distance and bullet caliber, then it's easier to hone in those skills without the pressure of someone who's clocked 200 more hours than you. Maybe you're new to the game and don't need people harassing and trying to kick you because you haven't gone through a boot camp like they did. Simply speaking, it's the freshest and most immersive way to get involved with the mechanics of any game. Later on, in any game's life, the service will eventually die out. Whether this is down to players moving on to something new or the developers shut down the servers, it happens to all multiplayer games in the end. Without bots, games like Battlefront 2 wouldn't have lived on for as long as it did, or still does. When the 2005 Battlefront 2 servers were turned back on recently, the rush of players to jump back in was impressive, but that passion had been kept alive due to the memories of playing with bots as kids, as the number of people able to play online back then was drastically less than today. With more and more studios prioritising multiplayer ahead of anything else, and with big franchises releasing a new iteration of the same game every year, it creates a void of previous titles in its wake, barren and uninviting. There's no time to fall in love with an installment anymore, rather you have to love the franchise, hopping from one version to another just to be able to play the game with a full lobby. What do the people who don't like multiplayer do, and why risk alienating people who don't have the time to get good at one shooter, let alone many? What happens to those who want to approach the competitive aspect of a game in a gentler stride? Free from toxicity, rage quitting, voice spam, and team killing. These are where the bots used to come in, and should again. I find it very strange that with the advancements over the entire industry, and especially AI, since the early 2000s, that fewer games are using them for this purpose. With the improvements made over the past couple of decades, the majority of AI has evolved beyond simply running at the opponent. Why not take advantage of this? They could be a great determiner of skill and training for those wishing to venture out into the online world and without the condescension or hostility of other players. And with such a massive push for esports, I think it's time for certain publishers to consider the return of bots. Personally, I think we need to consider our vacant-skinned allies and appreciate everything these bots have allowed us to be able to do and the hurdles they helped countless players cross.